Hello and welcome to Rappler Talk. I'm Michelle Abad, Rappler reporter covering the Filipino diaspora. It's been 2 days since the world found out who America voted to be their next president. Republican bet Donald Trump, who has been known to stand on harsh immigration policies, is making a stunning comeback to the White House. Today I'm speaking to Jath Shao, a Filipino-American immigration lawyer based in the US, to talk about what Trump's return means for Filipino Americans and Filipinos hoping to migrate to the United States. Hi, Jath. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Michelle. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for coming to our show. And definitely, this is a big topic and something that I'm pretty sure our Filipino-American community and Filipinos who are coming there are very concerned about. So maybe just for our first question, could you give us an overview of what we know about Donald Trump's immigration policy for his second term?
So we've seen some of their plans. They came out with this what's called Project 2025, right? And so they kind of talk about how they want to cut down immigration in every single facet of from birthright citizenship to visas to trying to deport everybody that's here without status. So we know what their goal is, but it's yet to see what's actually going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's go back in time just a little bit. So when Trump was president from 2017 to early 2021, what were the policies like then? And what seemed to change when President Joe Biden came into the picture?
So I would say the biggest difference between when Biden is president and Trump is president is that under Biden, if you have a very straightforward case, let's say it's a marriage green card or it's a work visa. If you have a very straightforward case, then often you just get interviewed quickly. Often you get approved quickly without an interview. Whereas in Trump's case, they wanted everybody to interview. They set up basically using the system and red tape to make things slow. I think I've written about it before, actually, on Rappler, but it's a lot easier to break a system from within than from without.
Mm-hmm. How would you compare the cases that you handled, the advice that you gave from the first Trump administration and then when Biden came in?
I would say the processing times have just been getting longer and longer and longer. When they do deep background checks or whether it's just sometimes it's just logistical, your papers are just sitting there somewhere waiting for someone to get to them. But just in general, the overall trend since Trump won through Biden is that, for example, a straightforward marriage green card used to take a year from the Philippines. Now 2 years is average, and some people we're seeing 3 or 4 years, which it's not very reasonable to be apart from your wife or husband for that long.
So sorry, just to clarify, during Biden's time, the waiting time became longer than with Trump?
Going back to during COVID, they shut down a whole bunch of programs such as the Peace Corps. So when you go in the Peace Corps, you automatically have a security clearance, and you can plug right into a government job. Whereas if you're coming straight out of college or wherever, it takes 9 months to a year to just get to the security clearance to just even get into a government job. So during the first Trump administration, a lot of veteran people left, and they didn't really fill the positions as fast. And then plus COVID, plus hiring, things that happened, a lot of external factors kind of contributed to where the State Department is telling us that now it's normal for a visa to take 2 to 3 years, where in the past it was like 1, or maybe 1.5.
Okay, so we're learning here now that, just it doesn't necessarily have to do with the administration. Some bureaucratic processes still kind of stay the same, or they could even get longer. So I guess that's something that should be taken into consideration by the Filipinos who are going through these processes. So now let's go to Trump's plan to terminate every open borders policy of the Biden administration and carry out the largest deportation in U.S. history. So do you see any legal barriers to him carrying this out?
I guess, again, there are legal barriers, right? So there is due process in America. You do get your chance to make your case in court and appeal, sometimes appeal to 2 or 3 different courts. But really, think it's more of a logistical problem, right? So, and again, this is may or may not have to do with Filipinos because we're not coming to the border in numbers like people from other countries. Like in recent years, we've even seen like Chinese, Indians, Russians, Ukrainians come to the Mexican border to cross into the U.S. And really, you don't really see Filipinos do that because it takes a visa for us to get to Mexico or Canada. I mean, it's not easy for us to just come. But really, what happens is, I guess what I would compare under Biden, they have priorities. So people that have serious crimes, people that have terrorism, people that there's something rather they're put on a higher priority than someone who's just the average person who's maybe they overstay their tourist visa, they married a U.S. citizen, they have a couple of kids. That person's a lower priority. Under Trump, everybody's a priority, and the problem is when everybody's a priority, nobody's a priority. So everybody gets caught up in the net, and they may not have the logistics to process all that through. So I guess the goal is to deport people, but I feel like if you don't do it in a targeted way, it's just going to create even more chaos and just people waiting in cases forever.
Now that you mentioned, you mentioned how there's the dynamics between Filipinos not necessarily going to the borders, but just to clarify, do you see now that even if we're not, or the Filipinos are not necessarily going towards the borders to try and immigrate into the United States, could they be facing similar treatment from the administration with people who are trying to cross the border, do you think?
So I think there's a little bit of a difference between the people that are in the U.S. and the people that come to the border.
Yeah.
So if you look at actual statistics, only about 10% of the people that have been placed in removal recently are people who have been living in the U.S. For a long time. Probably like 90% of people are people that come to the border. So again, I guess if they do create like fast track courts and slow track courts, if that's even impossible, there are different ways that people get into the system. But I mean, for example, I have this Filipino guy who originally entered the U.S. in 1990, and right now, 25 years later, we're still fighting his case in court. And I guess there's no end in sight to somebody like that. That it's kind of they're trapped in purgatory. They can't move forward or back.
Okay, and I think this plan from Trump to carry out this really big deportation is it's obviously worrying to the undocumented immigrants. But do you think that documented or naturalized immigrants to the United States have anything to worry about?
I guess I would say it has to do with your immigration history, right? So on almost every form in the U.S. Immigration, it'll ask you to sign under the penalty of perjury that everything you say is true, and if you do happen to lie or mislead the government, that's something that could lead to what they call a permanent bar. So if there is something in your case, when you apply for a green card or citizenship, they can go back and look for it. But I mean, if there is nothing in your case, if everything is true and good, I don't think you have anything to worry about. It's just, people that are in the gray area, maybe a little more scared than they would be under somebody who would prioritize like a criminal over just somebody that overstayed their visa. It's a little bit. I think. What I would compare it to is how in the Philippines there's no jaywalking laws. You can just walk across the street, right? So to some extent, the government can't chase every person that jaywalks across the street or speeds. And who do they pursue? Do they pursue people that have violent crimes and felonies, or they pursue just everybody who doesn't have legal status? It's a question of, I guess, government priorities, because the government doesn't have resources to deport everybody. I think even if they do, it would take 20, 30, 40 years. And by then, Trump will be long gone, and it will be somebody else sitting in the Oval Office that probably has, who knows what's going to go on next year, let alone 20, 30 years from now.
Yeah. Let's try to imagine like a scenario where I know I've heard of some reports of some documented immigrants who for example, stay in the same house as undocumented immigrants. So let's imagine a scenario where like police come or ICE comes into a house where there are both documented and undocumented Filipino Americans. And for example, they try to arrest the documented immigrants. Like, as a lawyer, what would you advise? Like, what are their rights in that moment?
Yeah, I guess I would say that, under the U.S. Constitution, everybody that's within the U.S. has rights, even if you're undocumented, even if you don't have legal status, as long as you're a person within the jurisdiction, there is still due process. So I would advise, advise people obviously to seek legal counsel, and definitely the biggest thing is I would say don't take legal advice from the police, don't take legal advice from ICE. It's a very basic legal principle. You don't take advice from your enemy. So I would seek, legal counsel and just tell them, I don't want to talk to you until a lawyer's present, and I don't believe what you're saying. Prove to me that what you're saying. I think. I mean, I understand why people are scared, right? But I think at the end of the day, we did survive Trump 1.0, so we're going to survive season 2, I think.
Okay. So Trump has talked about ending birthright citizenship, or when a child automatically becomes a U.S. citizen upon birth in the country. So can this be carried out legally, ending this birthright citizenship? And what would that mean for undocumented immigrants in the U.S. right now that are planning to give birth there?
So I would say that the majority of the world, right, including the Philippines, citizenship is by blood, which is based on your parents. The concept of citizenship based on the place of your birth is kind of unique to the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, like more of a North American thing. But in terms of legally, I don't think that he's going to be able to change something like that because it's in the Constitution, right? Persons within the U.S., within the jurisdiction of the United States, have due process, equal protection under the law, and that includes citizenship. So the only exception to that is somebody who has diplomatic immunity. Mm-hmm. So let's say you're the ambassador from the Philippines, maybe you don't get birthright citizenship, but it's in the Constitution. The only way they could change this is if they had 2/3 of Congress, which I know they have a majority, but they don't have 2/3 of Congress. And in addition, there's also a Supreme Court case from it's Wong Kim Ark versus the United States. So in that case, this was during the Chinese Exclusion Act. Wong Kim Ark was born in the U.S. He went back to China for vacation, came back, and they said he couldn't come back. This case was fought all the way to the Supreme Court. And again, that decided that even though his parents, were Chinese born, they were just regular people here. They didn't have U.S. citizenship. The fact that he was born here and he was not the child of a diplomat with diplomatic immunity meant that he was subject to the jurisdiction, and thus, being born here gave him citizenship. So, I guess that if the judges are really concerned with what they say, the original meaning of the statute and following precedent from the 1800s, then I don't think birthright citizenship is something that's realistically going to be changed.
Okay. All right. So another topic, do you think it will be harder now for Filipinos to acquire tourist or student visas?
Yeah, that I think is where the change in administration may have a big effect. So the thing about tourist or student visas or any other non-immigrant visas is that the consul is required to presume that you have immigrant intent, and you have to prove to him that you're going to go back to the Philippines after your vacation or your studies or after working, whatever it may be. If you're a non-immigrant, you're not supposed to have the intent to stay, which is kind of weird because I know like almost everybody does. But looking at the actual stats, during the Biden administration, roughly 75% of Filipinos were approved for tourist visas. Under Trump, it was maybe 69. So again, like if you have a strong case, you're good. If you're on the borderline, maybe they have that discretion and they don't need to explain to you why. All they need to say is, sorry, we're not going to approve this today.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How about fiance or spouse visas?
So for fiance or spouse visas, right? The weird thing about this is the person who calls me, the person who talks to me, is almost always the American that wants to bring, his or her spouse here or fiance. And I think if Americans realize that this is something that has to do with their rights, it'll be it won't be it would be it's not something they would ever take away completely, I don't think, but it could be something where, instead of 6 months, it's going to take a year and a half, 2 years, because they're looking through every social media post you ever made. They're looking through, everything they can find on you, and just making sure that, I guess doing the deep background checks that Republicans want.
Mm-hmm. Have you observed any difference in the time it takes to process, like, for example, Americans or white people that are petitioning their Filipina fiance or spouse to come to them versus a naturalized Filipino immigrant in the States that's trying to get their spouse to come? Do you see any difference in those cases, like in what you've handled?
I guess I wouldn't necessarily break it down like that, but I would say that when you're doing a marriage green card, right, or even a fiance, you want to tell a story, right? And so if he and she are roughly the same age, same religion, speak the same language, and I would even go so far as to say as like they're roughly the same level of attractiveness, then those should be straightforward cases. The ones that have problems are when there's like a 50-year age gap, or they don't speak the same language, or something like that. So I guess I would say that, again, like people with straightforward cases, people with real cases shouldn't worry too much. It's the people that have something. If there's something that you think looks suspicious about the case, then they might take another look at it.
So it's not necessarily a thing of race, but it's really just, how credible your story seems. Is that correct?
Yeah, and also I would say too, you have to remember, so they're people too, right? Someone on the government side. I remember, I myself, like one time I went to apply for a tourist visa, and you could tell, like, when your number comes up, if you go to that window, that officer seems to be denying a lot more people, and that officer seems to be approving more people, and sometimes it's just a luck of the draw, Some officers are more strict, some officers are less strict, and some people see it as their job to grant you a visa, some people see it as their job to deny your visa, and, that's not something that the applicant has control over. It's just a matter of presenting your story to the officer and whether or not they believe you.
Okay. And in the cases that you've assisted, what are the most common ways that Filipinos acquire work visas? And do you think these will be more difficult to apply for now?
I think, so obviously, nurses and physical therapists, that's a big one. Recently, we've seen a lot of J1 teachers too, especially in STEM subjects and special ed. But I would say probably the difference between a Trump and a Biden is they're going to delay more and they're going to look more closely. So, for example, for EB3 green cards, actually only 25% of people get approved. So even if you're a nurse, even if there's a hospital somewhere, even if everything else, there's still a chance that you might get denied. And it might not be your fault. Maybe the hospital doesn't actually have the money to pay you, or maybe the agency doesn't have the right credentials. I would say be very careful with who you deal with, and just make sure that everything's legit. Make sure that you're not getting charged with fees that you're not supposed to pay. That's something that agencies like to do. But on the whole, I guess I would say for temporary work visas, they might be cool with that, but for the permanent, that's where they would probably be a little bit more strict.
Mm-hmm. And I think you've mentioned before, like in our different interviews and some of your call-ins, I think you're also dealing with investment visas. Do you see any dynamics here that might change for investor visas?
So the funny thing about this is, right, the Trump family, they're very famously anti-immigration, but also if you look at their actual investments, so there's the EB5 green card, which you invest $1 million in typically what's a real estate development. Well, Trump and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, they actually sell a lot of these EB5 visas for people that have the money to invest in their buildings, in Manhattan or wherever it may be. So again, maybe he's trying to target a little bit more wealthier kind of immigrant. Um, I will say for entrepreneurs, we have been seeing, even during Biden, a little bit more tightening. So there's an entrepreneur visa called the E2, where you can come in and run a small business. So some of those have been getting denied where if they don't believe it's a real business. They don't want you just throwing money in for no reason. They want to see you coming in and actually running a business and being able to show that you make a profit and ideally hire some American workers too.
Okay, and then maybe just for our last question, at this point, Phil-Ams, as well as undocumented and aspiring Filipino immigrants, might be fearful of what's to come under the new Trump administration. So any general advice that you could give?
General advice is, as a lawyer, I always tell you, you don't need to actively disclose something negative about yourself, but you do need to tell the truth if somebody asks. So, I would say don't exaggerate, don't bend the rules, and I would say keep your nose clean, tell everything the truth, present yourself, as you are. And if you have a good story, if I guess if you have a good case, then I would think that good cases will still get approved. It just might take longer. But people who have maybe if there's something in your history or that might raise red flags, I would say definitely consult a lawyer before you file anything. Definitely at least get some legal advice what the consequences could be, and maybe possible options that you might not have thought of. So there's a reason that we do this, right? So for an immigrant, their case is their one case, but for us, we've seen hundreds, thousands of cases, and maybe we can give you a little guidance and take away some of that stress and fear.
Okay, I think we can end on that note. Thank you, Jath, for your time.
It's a lot harder than I thought. It's easier to write and you can go back and edit and stuff, but
definitely. I mean, this was very useful advice, and I'm pretty sure that our viewers will be able to take advantage of it. So if you have thoughts to share or maybe even questions for Jath, you can head on over to our Overseas Filipinos channel on the Rappler Communities app. Let's continue the conversation there. Again, this has been Michelle Abad for Rappler Talk. Thank you for joining us.